The CNBC app. Global market news in one place. Customizable sections and personalized alerts. Stocks tracking, interactive charts and market insights all in your hands. Stay connected. Stay informed. Download the CNBC app today.
Very warm welcome to this Monday edition of Squawk Box with Karen Cho and myself in the studio. And what have we got? We've got Arjun in a fawn-coloured coat on the streets of London and Juliana in a fawn-coloured coat on the streets of London. These are your headlines.
U.S. and Chinese officials meet in London in a bid to defuse trade tensions and potentially strike a new deal on tariffs.
The EU welcomes China's proposal to fast-track rare earth exports, saying the issue is of strategic importance to the bloc, while Beijing says it expects reciprocal measures to promote trade in high-tech products.
President Trump deploying the National Guard in Los Angeles, drawing strong criticism from the state governor as violent protests over federal immigration raids and deportations extend into a third day.
And Nvidia CEO Jensen Huang set to take the stage here at London Tech Week as the UK looks to boost its AI sector.
You don't say fawn, you say taupe, do you? For the
Taupe
colour?
or taupe?
Taupe.
Yes, I do.
Is taupe taupe?
Probably the
Oh,
same
okay,
thing.
I know.
I'd say.
How are you?
Very well,
Haven't seen you
thank
for a couple of days.
Yeah,
but,
yeah.
Unbelievably
Nice to
busy
be
for you.
back.
Oh, I've been so busy. Now look, what's the biggest thing this week?
Biggest thing, trade talks, number one.
Maybe.
Jensen Huang,
Yeah, maybe.
the Fed.
Maybe.
I feel like I'm just throwing
No,
darts
I
at a
think all
board.
of the above.
Right?
And CPI, I'm just going to, and PPI,
Yes,
I'm going to
the
chuck it all
data.
in. All of the above. And I actually had all of those things listed as well. I think it's, and looking back at the extraordinary payroll numbers as well. So I think all of the above is absolutely fascinating. But I want to draw the things that you and I are focusing on at the start of the week with what I just heard from Sylvia Morrow at the end of the excellent Europe Early Edition. She said, we've had two fund managers on this programme who are saying, hold off at the moment on your market portfolio because all these amazing things going on, these really important things, maybe best to hold off a bit before you make portfolio allocations. Well, that's nuts, isn't it? I'm sorry. These guys are paid vast amounts of money. I didn't know who the two were, so I'm not criticising anyone individually. Hold off, just see what happens. But the fact of the matter is, the S&P, where was it at the start of April on these tariffs? It was down 18% from its previous level. And now it's virtually flat. So with respect to these fund managers who are saying, hold off, don't know what's going on at the moment, you've lost 16% of potential upside. That's like years of profit.
We must have been looking at the same data point this morning. It was the first number that just jumped out to me that we're 2% off the all-time highs on the S&P 500. And similar territory, if you look at the NASDAQ 100, the FANG Plus stocks moving last week. And of course, we saw the semiconductors. So if Jensen Huang says something interesting this week, what is it going to do to the semiconductor index that bounced more than 5% last week?
In a massive rally. You'll go through numbers a bit later on. But again, amongst those enormous stories that Karen and I just mentioned at the top of the show, a new round of high-level trade talks between the US and China are set to kick off in London today. I'm not entirely sure where, but maybe Juliana knows. The meeting comes just days after US President Donald Trump and Chinese President Xi Jinping held their first direct phone call since Trump's return to the White House, as the pair look to break an impasse over trade tariffs. In a sign of cooling tensions ahead of today's meeting over the weekend, China said it had granted some applications for rare earth exports, but didn't specify exactly which countries they were approved for. Now, speaking with Fox News, the White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt described the mood heading into today's talks.
We want China and the United States to continue moving forward with the agreement that was struck in Geneva. The administration has been monitoring China's compliance with the deal, and we hope that this will move forward to have more comprehensive trade talks. Look, the United States and China have strategic interests in one another's markets, and the president is always going to put American workers and industries first, and that in the talks in Geneva really set the table for that. But we need China to comply with their side of the deal.
All right, Juliana, we were gobsmacked, amazed that actually there was real tentative meat on the bones of the first announcement that we had out of Geneva. Are you expecting more of the same in London?
Well, similar, Steve, to what we saw with Geneva, both sides are holding their cards pretty close to their chest this time around. We don't even have detail around where these talks are taking place today, and we're just hours away from when they are due to kick off the conversation. So let me run you through what we do know. The U.S. administration is sending Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, along with the Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick and Jameson Greer, the U.S. Trade Representative, to meet their Chinese counterparts here in London. Now, the expectation is that the focus is shifting beyond tariffs to export controls. Now, Howard Lutnick, the addition of him to this negotiating team is quite interesting because he has oversight over export controls for the U.S. administration. And when we're talking export controls, we're really talking about rare earth metals when it comes to China. China has huge leverage when it comes to these rare earth metals, critical minerals here for a number of industries, autos, military equipment, chips. This is a hugely important part of supply chains across the globe. So let me just give you a little bit of the backstory here, how this is going to feature or could feature in the trade talks today. China mines about 70% of rare earth metals in the world, so dominates the supply chain here. And in early April, China moved forward with a process whereby companies needed export licenses to export rare earth metals around the world. And they've been quite slow, according to the U.S. administration, to grant these export licenses, which is quite frustrating to the U.S. administration. We heard that from President Trump at the end of last week, the phone call he had with President Xi of China, which led to the talks taking place today. And now over the weekend, China has approved several export licenses around these rare earth metals. Not a huge amount of detail around what exactly these pave the way in terms of exports to, but it's seen as a gesture of goodwill here. So that's a huge piece of the leverage that the Chinese have. When it comes to the Americans' leverage at this point, I think it's worth taking a look at the data that came out of China overnight. We are seeing an economic impact already in China as a result of the trade war, the tariffs that are in place. We're now looking at 30% tariffs on Chinese goods coming into the U.S., 10% on American goods into China after that Geneva agreement. The data overnight shows that consumer prices in China have weakened for a fourth straight month. Exports have plunged in China, so the economy there is under pressure. We also know that China would like to see more chips exported from the United States to China, given the role that those chips obviously have in China's technological ambitions. So bringing it back to today's trade talks, what could we see in terms of de-escalation from here? Could we see more movement on those tariff levels, the 30% and 10%? Could we see movement on these export controls? Those are two things to watch as we head into these talks later on today.
Juliana, I was just raking through the data that we had from China this morning. The reality is we're seeing consequences there, the 34.5% plunge on exports to the US from China, but also the deflation story that persists in the Chinese economy. It feels as though economically China needs a win at some point beyond just its self-help measures.
Well, I think that's exactly, when you think about the leverage that America has, that's exactly where I would point viewers. The economic impact of this trade war could be severe for the Chinese economy. And to your point, Karen, we're already seeing it show up in the numbers. But I would cite this amazing quote that I read a few months back. The Economist gets credit for it, that America may pack a bigger punch, but China has a stronger chin, suggesting that the Chinese economy or the Chinese government is willing to endure the pain here and willing to hold their ground. So yes, America, I think, does have leverage when it comes to the economic pain that the tariffs so far can inflict on the Chinese economy. But is it going to make a difference given how long-term the Chinese government thinks about things? Whether or not that stacks up against the leverage that China has here, the consensus among geopolitical strategists and analysts seems to be that at this point in time, given China's dominance in rare earths, the leverage is really, the balance of power is really on China's side right now.
I'm really confused. I've been in this business for decades and I'm really thick, so just bear with me on this one as well. If the tariffs, Juliana, don't happen because they have some beautiful trans-Pacific rapprochement, phew, that's great. What happens to the revenue that's supposed to support the big, beautiful bill deficit that's being created? Because I thought there was trillions of dollars of money coming from the tariffs to support the US economy. But if we don't have those tariffs, then we haven't got that revenue, and then the deficit blows out even more. Or am I being even thicker than usual here, Juliana?
Steve, I think it's an absolutely fair point. We know that even with the tariffs at current levels, there is huge concern about the how the U.S. is going to fund itself moving forward. Huge concern about the U.S. fiscal picture. So if we do see those tariffs come down, surely that is another major headwind on the revenue front. We're also, just in terms of the bill, seeing huge pushback from on that Section 899 piece on the taxing of foreign holdings of U.S. assets. So the government in the U.S. under huge pressure here. So we may not see movement on the tariff front. I think, again, taking it back to talks today, it feels as though, given the presence of Howard Lutnick and the commentary out of Trump last week, that the focus is shifting away from tariffs to export control. So we might not see movement on the tariff front, but if we do, that's definitely a key feature here. And one thing, Steve, to add to that, the Chinese are major holders of U.S. treasuries. So, add that into the mix here when it comes to China's leverage and also tying that to the U.S. fiscal outlook and the bond market. China, again, major power when it comes to these negotiations.
Juliana, thank you very much for that. Just debating with Steve off camera where they would actually hold the talks. I mean, the Americans, significant more bricks and mortar here. The big embassy they built near Battersea. They've got Winfield House where the ambassador resides. The Chinese have a small embassy in Marylebone. I mean, angling for much more around East Smithfield. Yeah. So American residents of some sort makes more sense.
They're not going to have it on either one's territory. They would have it in a neutral location. But I mean, it's not Olympia because we know that because Arjun's there today.
That's right, not Olympia. So what are we left with? Big hotels, the Dorchester, Claridge's. Exactly.
I don't know. Exciting. Well, Juliana will be there as soon as we find out. She'll have to move the camera point because the truth of it is, no one said, have they?
Exactly.
So extraordinary.
Watch out for those flags, I think is the message. Well, meantime, now UK Chancellor of the Exchequer, Rachel Reeves, is expected to hold a bilateral meeting as well with Chinese Vice Premier He Lifeng during his visit to London. That's according to a government source speaking to Reuters. Reeves' last meeting with He was in January during a state visit to China. On a different note, US President Donald Trump authorized the deployment of around 2,000 National Guard troops to Los Angeles over the weekend in response to days of protests against federal immigration deportation raids. NBC's Steve Patterson filed this report.
Protesters and law enforcement officials squaring off after days of raids, riots, and demonstrations. And a rare move by President Trump, mobilizing 2,000 California National Guard troops against the will of the state's governor. Overnight, another major flashpoint in front of the federal detention center where undocumented immigrants captured by ICE are being held. In nearby Compton, chaos. Protests there dissolving into lawlessness, demonstrators upending roadblocks, setting off fireworks, while a small group of looters broke into a gas station. These protests followed a day of skirmishes between authorities and protesters outside of a Home Depot. Law enforcement firing tear gas and non-lethal rounds into several crowds.
I couldn't see who was shooting, but they were trying to aim right at me, which is like it's very scary.
Sheriff Robert Luna saying his deputies only acted as peacekeepers and didn't assist with any federal action.
We will protect your right to peacefully protest, but we cannot and will not tolerate violence or destruction of property.
Today, Governor Gavin Newsom accused President Trump of attempting to manufacture a crisis by mobilizing the National Guard, adding he's hoping for chaos so he can justify more crackdowns, more fear, more control. Trump's border czar, Tom Homan, defended the move to NBC's Jacob Soboroff and says about 150 undocumented immigrants have been detained in the last few days.
But not just to protect the law enforcement, to protect the general public. If Democratic leaders want to turn their back on public safety, they can.
Tonight, tensions reaching a boiling point as more troops hit the ground.
We had a fairly strong finish to markets Friday, a pop of more than 1% on the major boards. As we get set up for trade this morning, we're looking to give back a little bit of territory, so a bit more caution for the Monday session. Still ahead on the show, NVIDIA unveils a swathe of UK deals and partnerships ahead of CEO Jensen Huang's keynote speech at London Tech Week. We'll bring you that speech just after 9 a.m. London time. Plus, President Trump calls his relationship with Elon Musk over after the pair's spectacular fallout on social media last week, warning of serious consequences if the tech mogul funds his rivals. And the Swiss government reveals proposals for new capital rules at UBS. We'll hear from the CEO of the Swiss Bankers Association, Roman Studer. That's at 8:30 London time. London Tech Week gets underway today with a focus on tech in the age of AI. NVIDIA CEO Jensen Huang is set to headline today's agenda and will be joined on stage by UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer. We'll bring you his keynote from 9:05 London time. Well, let's get after Arjun. He's at London Tech Week. Arjun, we've got two tech events this week, one in London, one in Paris, with VivaTech also kicking off later this week. And NVIDIA's CEO is going to be at both of them. What are we expecting to hear from Jensen Huang this week?
Yeah, Karen, all eyes on Europe, all eyes on Jensen Huang here. London kicks off his European tour, where he will be attending, as you mentioned, London Tech Week, but also GTC in Paris. Here at London Tech Week, it's all going to be about the UK AI infrastructure build-out, how that's going, and NVIDIA and other companies here in the UK are hosting what they're calling a UK Sovereign AI Forum, exploring that AI infrastructure build-out as well as fostering the UK AI ecosystem here as well. Now, we've heard a couple of announcements, one from Nscale, which is building out data centers here in the UK, saying they're going to deploy about 10,000 NVIDIA Blackwell GPUs by the end of 2026. Also, cloud player Nebius saying it's going to bring online 4,000 NVIDIA GPUs as well. So that's what we've heard so far. On stage, we're likely to hear more about NVIDIA's investments in the UK when it comes to infrastructure and other things as well. And really the topic here is around this idea of sovereign AI, that data infrastructure, AI infrastructure needs to be hosted in the country where those AI applications are happening rather than relying on data centers and servers elsewhere as well. So that's going to be key. And for NVIDIA, I think the benefits are very clear here. It's looking to unlock new markets as China becomes a lot more harder, and we saw that over in the Middle East as well. It's trying to expand its customer base beyond those hyperscalers like Microsoft and like Amazon as well. And it's trying to remain ahead in AI. And for the UK, this is a big game of optics as well. It wants to show that it's an AI leader in Europe. It wants to show that it's managing to get those big investments, particularly on the infrastructure side as well. And the UK government wants to be seen very close to NVIDIA, which of course is one of the leaders in the AI space with its GPU technology. And I think it's a similar story over in France as well. We know President Macron there has been very forward thinking in terms of technology and trying to position France as a tech hub. And I think you'll see similar things going there. Quite clearly, Jensen Huang, hot property here. Globally, governments and countries all trying to get a piece of him. And I've not really seen anything like this in terms of other tech CEOs in the past, but I think it clearly underscores how NVIDIA has become central to this AI story, which many say is only just at the beginning for now, Karen.
Arjun, I hope we're going to learn a lot this week around AI. I'm really looking forward to London Tech Week and, of course, Viva this week. We'll catch up with you later. Now, the Trump administration's spending cuts across research, academia and higher education are triggering a brain drain. According to the journal Nature, there was a surge in US-based applicants seeking jobs overseas in the first few months of the Trump presidency and a drop in those applying to the US from abroad. Attempts to restrict foreign student visas means the drain is also hitting prospective talent, although the White House argues that the changes will make space for domestic applicants. Let's get to Jano Kostad, who is head of challenges at Sprint, Germany's federal agency for breakthrough innovation. Jano, thank you very much for joining us today. When we think about academia, we know that this is about having some freedom to research ideas and carry forward that innovation. But now we've got political pressures in the United States, questions overhanging funding and even access around student visas. How does Europe exploit this moment and ensure that more talent comes this way?
So first of all, thank you very much for having me. And its directions have been out really quickly, with the European Commission announcing a 500 billion euro program for doing science in Europe. We've seen nation states such as France, the Netherlands, Germany announce similar programs as well, down to individual institutions like single universities and non-university research funders to really try to attract those talents. And for me, it's really about, for one, giving places to those people who cannot do world-class research in the US currently. But it's also about ensuring that we can use the advances from science and innovation in Europe as well as the world.
What evidence are you seeing that top American talent, whether it's in the field of science and technology, are interested in coming to Europe at this point? Any evidence in the numbers so far that they are relocating?
So if you take, for example, the Max Planck Society, which is based in Germany and is one of the most prominent funders of basic research in Europe, they just had a recent call and they saw a threefold increase of applications from the US, where interestingly, applications from other parts of the world really remained constant compared to last year. So that's a clear first indicator that they are able to attract top talent. But what's also clear is that other institutions or across the board, that is not yet happening. So it is the most prestigious institutions, the most prestigious funders who are able to attract the top talent. But there is not kind of the mass exodus of top talent from the US to Europe yet.
Yeah, Jano, I'm glad what you said, because it's palpable nonsense to say that the top US universities and the Ivy League will not be attracting top talent. I was actually looking down at, just for sake of argument, MIT, which obviously one of the top institutions on the planet. And I was looking at their acceptance rates. And I'll just give an example for the class of 2028, which has already been looked at. There were 28,232 applications to MIT class of 2028, of which there was an acceptance rate already of 1,275, which is 4.5%, i.e. there's another 94% of students out there who are probably brilliant students who are not getting their posts. We can part that because you've agreed with that. But what about actually the PhDs? What about the professors themselves? What about the staff? Because in terms of students, I still believe that on both sides of the Atlantic, there'll be brilliant talent trying to get a position. But what about the actual research students? What about the professors themselves? Are we seeing any move there?
So the numbers that I just quoted, the threefold increase, that was people who have had an academic career that are about to open their first own labs. So these are people with PhDs in the sciences. And that is a clear indicator that there is somewhat of a move, but the absolute numbers really need to put into perspective, because, I mean, it is an increase from a 25 numbers of applications to about 80 applications to establish new labs in the Max Planck Society framework. So that, again, while 80 new labs, I mean, they will not all be established, but that is not kind of a replica of the US science innovation ecosystems that we see on the East Coast, West Coast, and in other areas of the country. But it is a strong move, especially as those people, half of them have been at MIT, Stanford, and other major universities in the US before.
Yeah, just at a completely different level. Let me ask you an ethical question, or a question about how this works. There is a feeling that amongst certain right-wingers in the United States that they allow Chinese and other students to come into the country, they learn a lot of new techniques, they build up on R&D, and then they take that knowledge home and replicate it back in China as well. I mean, how much are we talking about intellectual IP theft are we actually seeing compared to the rhetoric?
So it really is a different game comparing China and Europe. So because science and innovation in Europe is open, and that's exactly what we are looking at here, because this is not supposed to be a zero-sum game. Science and investments in science and innovation have tremendous benefits for society, oftentimes a kind of multiple benefit compared to the original investments in those scientific and innovation institutions. And when you look at Europe, it is a much more open system. And with that, the benefits accrue not only within Europe, but actually across the world, including the US. So think about new drugs being developed in Europe. These will be to the benefit of the American people as well, just as it was for the rest of the world when the US has and remains to be a powerhouse in science and innovation.
Can I ask you about the Chinese student? Clearly, there's been a big model where the Chinese student goes to Western university. Some of them hope to stay in that country and forward their careers. Others go back to China with the knowledge that they've accumulated. How important is that knowledge accumulation to the Chinese market?
It certainly is. It's a process where the Chinese model showed that they can accelerate technological development and build up of know-how, of competencies in a way that they couldn't have just based on their own higher education institutions. Same is true, obviously, also for technological development. And I think it is a development where we need to have a look at kind of the geopolitical consequences as well. And I think that is one where Europe can be very competitive in demonstrating that this is a place with freedom of science, freedom of the people, and really a great place to live in.
And let me ask one, again, a completely different question, Yano, as well. The cost of it, we haven't talked about it. We know that to send a kid through a very good college in the United States costs vast amounts of money, tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars. How is the cost in Europe compared with the States?
So obviously there are costs associated to that, because the vast majority of the European higher education system is a public system. These costs are not directly accrued by the students or their families themselves, but rather by the larger society. And I think that is one where it is really attractive for top talent that cannot afford to, get the money for those tuition fees to really come to Europe and start building their career here. And I think it's something where we, when we can attract top talent, really leverage that openness, the culture, the diversity that we have in Europe, and I can really inspire world-class new research.